afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this session organised by John Aldrich on behalf of the History Statistics section. We merit the other category in the RSS conference streams. My name is Alison McFarlane and I worked at Rothamsted for a very short time, a long time ago. A brief introduction before going into our speakers to explain where and what Rothamsted is and was. And there aren't many women in this presentation. I will start with a woman, Mary Ann Sherman, who was born in 1791 in Harpenden. This is on from a set of music which belonged to her. There's collections of music belonging to her and her mother, who was probably a professional musician. She married a clergyman in 1810. He didn't last very long, died in the same year. So, as a 22-year-old widow, she married the local landowner, John Bennet Laws I of Rothamsted Manor. When he was 44, he lived the lifestyle of the Regency upper class, hunting, shooting, fishing. He actually invited the Prince Regent to Harpenden to go hunting, and you can still see the stables. He built the stabling of Prince Regent's horses. I hope you don't find any traces of horse there these days with the fish restaurant. They had 3 children. I'm not going to ignore their daughters, but their son, John Bennet Laws II, is the relevant person for today, born in 1814, and he, after an undistinguished career at Eton, he went to Oxford, which he left without a degree, but his big interest was in chemistry, which wasn't taught much in Oxford those days, and he went back to Rothamsted and converted one of the bedrooms to a chemistry lab, because what he was interested in was deriving artificial fertilisers, so you could plant the same crop each year and put artificial fertilisers on instead of rotating your crops. In 1843, he set up a series of companies to manufacture fertilisers, and he then also started field experiments on the Rothamsted estate, and together with Joseph Henry Gilbert, they developed Rothamsted into a pioneering agriculture research institute, about which you can read a lot of the history on the Hartland Local History website and the Rothamsted website. In 1854, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, and in 1874, a Fellow of the Statistical Society of London, before runner of the RSS. And of course, in those days, members of the statistical societies made interested in data rather than methodology. Today's session is about methodology, but that just shows you that there was rather a lot of data by the beginning of the 20th century for methodologists to get their teeth into. And so this is today's programme with the titles slightly corrected from what you've got in your programme. The opening speaker, John Aldrich, is going to talk about Rothamsted and the making of Sir Ronald Fisher, followed by Gavin on Rothamsted statistics after Fisher, and then the current head of statistics at Rothamsted is going to talk about the statistics of Rothamsted in 2019.
Yes, so there's not an awful lot about Fisher's ideas here. I acted on the assumption that you either know about Fisher's ideas or you can find out about them quite easily, because there's a huge literature. So when I say Rothamsted in the making of Sir Ronald Fisher, 3 things there. There's a Sir. He became a knight in the 50s, long after he left Rothamsted. The Sc.D. and the F.R.S. came while he was at Rothamsted. And so it's basically about Fisher's fame and reputation. The 3 pictures there, the one on the left is in fact the business. That's an aerial photo of Aldrich field in Rothamsted, Fisher and Aldrich. Fisher's this guy here, so if you like, this represents the community that Fisher is a part of. Okay, so Fisher dies at the end. So the end is Fisher dies in 1962. The most famous statistician, mathematical biologist in the world. The story starts 100 years ago, where there's a guy who's actually now aging, got a Cambridge degree in maths, looking for a job, gets a job in Rothamsted. He makes his career essentially in Rothamsted in 1933. One way he made a career, a successful career, was creating a career, so I'll talk about the background. Fisher helped make Fisher, Rothamsted helped Fisher make Fisher two ways, by creating a career which is unsurpassed, by letting him do other things. So letting him do other things is actually quite important, as you will see. Okay, so before Fisher, this is about making the career of an agricultural statistician. The problems existed before Fisher. There was statistical analysis before Fisher. The problems that occupied Fisher in the 1920s had to do with the design of experimental trials and the analysis of their results. That was one problem. The other one was the relationship between harvest and weather. Now, before Fisher, leading figures in agricultural science thought these problems were important problems that could be treated statistically. So Fisher wasn't, the ground was prepared for Fisher. I'm not talking about these guys. Okay, so this relates to Alison's pictures. There's John Bennett Laws. He was born a Sir, I think. The other guy, Joseph Henry Gilbert, became a Sir through achievement. One of them was a landowner, he owned the estate. He made money in fertilising. He was a lot of high-class amateur scientists. Gilbert, I think, was a professional scientist. Both were F.R.S, important people. So, in the course of the 19th century, Laws and Gilbert build up Rothamsted and make it a leading establishment. By the time they die roughly the same age, pretty old. Rothamsted sort of faded, but then in 1902, a guy called Hawes, who became Sir Daniel Hall, becomes director. Another element in the Rothamsted story, the growth, is public money. Laws had money because he made money out of fertiliser, and he established this Laws Agricultural Trust, Rothamsted Experimental Station in Ireland, in Greater London, I suppose. But public money becomes important around 1910, and public money is important. Okay, so the two topics, crops and weather. Laws and Gilbert actually wrote a paper in 1880 on crops and weather. Around in the early 20th century, that wasn't that interesting to agriculturalists, but was interesting to meteorologists. Experimental trials were a hot topic. The leading journal was called the Journal of Agricultural Science, and there's a few articles in that journal about the analysis of experimental trials. The people who wrote these articles were leading figures. I mean, they were the leading figures. Hall, I've mentioned, was director of Rothamsted. I'll mention it in a moment. The techniques they used came from the theory of errors. So the theory of errors was developed by Gauss and Planck early in the 19th century, and widely available in textbooks by the time I'm discussing. So here's a page, a table from a paper by Laws and Gilbert about basically about the weather and news. There's obviously a lot of computation here because they calculate averages and so on, but they don't do they don't calculate standard errors or informed inferences. They just calculate averages and talk about them. So that's Laws and Gilbert in 1880. Fast forward to this is another world, really. I mean, although Alison mentioned that Ben Laws was a fellow of the Statistical Society, the Statistical Society wasn't actually about agricultural trust at all. Agricultural statistics for the RSS was about, it's really economic statistics, agricultural economy. It's about prices and quantities that were, of course, crops that were marketed. Now, here's a paper from 1907. It's by a guy called Hooker. Hooker was actually a career civil servant who worked for he was actually a career state agricultural statistician, but his hobby was statistics and doing meteorological things. You can see already, as I said, he's a fellow of the Royal Meteorological. One of his mates, Hooker's mates, was Yule. Yule had learned about correlation with Pearson and Gavin, the development of correlation theory. He also became president in agricultural stats. So this is a different order of sophistication from the previous slide, because Hooker's doing correlation analysis. One of the developments that came out of the discussion of Hooker's paper is how to work out probabilities for correlation coefficient in small samples. So it feeds into this literature. I don't think it was noticed at all by the agriculturalists. Okay, so let's talk about the agriculturalists. Unfortunately, Thomas Wood, when he wrote this paper, was 40-ish rather than So here's a paper in General Agricultural Science by Wood. So Wood's an important person. He's the Cambridge boss of agricultural science. He collaborates with a fellow of King's College, an astronomer called Stratton, and basically they calculate probable errors. They're doing, if you like, two-sided comparison means and do things. So this is 1910. 1912, the Cambridge School of Agriculture, which was the boss, decided to get serious with stats and they appointed Yule to a job. It's only a half-time job because it's shared with economics as a job. So that's the Journal 1910. Journal 1911 has a paper by Daniel Hall, director of Rothamsted. He didn't collaborate with a specialist in these squares. He collaborated with Mercer, the author, who was an agriculturalist and statistician. So he's actually self-taught in everything. He writes extremely good papers around this time, so he's seriously interested. At the end of the paper, experimental field trials, there's an appendix by one student. The student was connected to Hall because Hall was an expert in cultivating hops, and hops were used to make Guinness. And the student, the alias of W.S. Gossett, worked for Guinness. There's a picture of the brewery around this time. In this paper, Environmental, the famous student paper, there's an illustration where he takes results from an agricultural article and doesn't put it to a test. So he basically, it's in a funny Bayesian frequencies world. So he comes up with the answer 32 to 1. There's a significant difference. Anyway, Gossett was like the guys I've mentioned, he was actually a chemist, but instead of doing agriculture, he did brewing. He learns up about error theory and then he goes to learn some from companies. He's somebody who's in the wings. He's not. I mean, the other people, Wood and Hall, were seriously involved in agricultural science. Student was known to these people, but he wasn't involved in those. And he became involved because Fisher made him 1914. Basically, 1914, agricultural statistics, in the sense that Fisher did it in the 20s, was ready for takeoff. Leading people were doing it, the leading journals publishing them. There was a sort of half move in appointing Gill to a lectureship in statistics, but then, of course, the war goes, half of Rothamsted, 3/4 probably volunteered in the army, and agriculture science stops. Okay, what happens? So now let's talk about Fisher. Fisher, at the end of the war, he's looking for a job. What happened was, when the war started, he wanted desperately to join the army, but because his eyesight was so bad, he was rejected. So he teaches maths and physics in public schools. I love the idea that purchasers of cigarettes in 1910 got picture cards of public schools, but then apparently they did, and that's what Bradford College looked like around this time. But so Fisher's got this job teaching in secondary school, private secondary school. All the time he's producing papers. So he produces famous paper in biometric on the exact distribution of the correlation coefficient. Famous paper in population genetics, famous enough for their conference last year on his centenary. So it's seriously good stuff. Genesis of twins I just included that for the address. In the list of fellows of the Royal Astronomical Society, there's Fisher there from the school. That is associated with a paper he writes in the Astronomical Journal. So he's basically hyperactive, intelligent person, stuck in a secondary school. The war ends, he's looking for a job. Okay, gets 2 job offers. One we have to smoke a gun because it's the letter that Carl Pearson wrote. Carl Pearson was professor of national eugenics, University College, London. He was head of something called the Gorton Laboratory. Gorton Laboratory is a good offer for Pearson because it's serious money, $350 a year in those days. And it's in a place that did what Fisher wanted. It did genetics, eugenics, statistical theory. So it's seriously good. On the other hand, Pearson wanted a man who would throw himself wholeheartedly into the work of the laboratory, not a researcher who followed his own individual lines regardless of the general scheme of work. Fisher didn't accept this job. Okay. A really important person in young Fisher's life was Leonard Darwin, who was known as Major Darwin because he was a soldier. Leonard Darwin was a real help for Fisher. Gave him money, gave him work, gave him advice. One of the things he says in his letter, if you're refusing, I quite understand your feelings, I wouldn't try to persuade you. He goes on to say that actually, if you took this job, you might succeed Pearson, who's getting on. So Pearson was 62-ish. So Pearson getting on, you might get this job. I'm not saying you wouldn't get this job, you might get this job. And that's something that's important because you're a true, I know you're a true eugenist. Anyway, basically Fisher was hot for eugenics. Darwin was the president of the Eugenics Society. That was one of their links. And Pearson's job was an important job in British eugenics, and Darwin wanted Fisher to have it. And Fisher refused. Okay, so that's the first offer. The second offer comes from John Russell, who succeeded Hall as director of Rothamsted. Wonderful building from the war period. So this is all public money to make this. One of the things, so Russell wrote in 1917 that he hopes when things become normal, something can be done with all the data that's accumulating. The data that's accumulating is on weather, it's on weather yields, and it's been going on. So decades of accumulating data. Rothamsted grew spectacularly between 1912 and 1920. So triple in scientific staff, so Rothamsted was expanding. Okay, so Fisher accepts the job. Darwin's a little sad. I'm a little sad. I'm glad for your sake because you've got a wife. And children, but husband's job. Basically, Fisher took a job, and this was a job. But I'm a little sad that you may not have much time for your justice. This was, and obviously this is how Darwin felt. But you would feel that. Fisher was so productive that he had time for everything. So, just looking at the Fisher bibliography, counting, he wrote approximately 200 pieces on Rothamsted, 100 classified as genetics, evolution, and eugenics, 100 on statistical theory, blah, blah, blah. Only 20 of this 200 are actually identified with Rothamsted stuff. And he also published 2 books. One was Statistical Methods for Research Workers, which was a Rothamsted book. The other was Genetical Theory of Natural Selection, which had nothing to do with Rothamsted. We couldn't really for advance. So he didn't publish actually very much on agriculture in terms of his volume. Okay. Of course, the obvious question to ask, especially when the script. Okay, the interesting thing about Fisher-John Russell relationship is why did Russell let him spend so much time doing other things? But there are no documents from the time laying out what Russell expected. So this statement here, recorded years later, this is Russell's autobiography in the 50s. Basically, I've got a personal letter from high authority saying, this bloke's spending too much time doing other things. And Russell said he's in effect defending Fisher did other things. And I've not found the letter from the high authority, and I identified the high authority. I think there seem to be 2 things going on. One was the general policy for all heads of department. If you're the head of the department, you just get on with it. I'm appointing you to the head of the department, so you're just do what you think sensible. That was the other thing. The other thing, then there's the Fisher factor. Fisher really was the star of Rothamsted operation. Russell thought he was a genius. Fisher was special. So when Fisher went on doing his other things, so a large part of what Fisher did at Rothamsted had nothing to do with Rothamsted. Rothamsted let him do it. Okay, so Fisher's appointed, and then the first time he appears in the annual report, it appears in this form. So he's not advertised as a casual worker. He's advertised as head of department with an assistant, Winifred Mackenzie. Fisher's first assistant was a woman, and she was called one of his miscellaneous papers. Okay, so Russell proclaims the statistical laboratory. In the report he wrote for that year, he says there are 4 great divisions in Rothamsted set up: the biological, chemical, physical, and statistical. And right from the start, Russell makes a big thing about statistics at Rothamsted. Only Rothamsted had a statistics unit. So Russell makes a big thing about it. Okay. So next step Fisher starts publishing his investigations into weather and crops in the Journal of Agricultural Science. 5 minutes late. Let's say something like that. So I need to still pass it. Yeah. So Fisher is on the left. This is astonishing stuff about the polynomials, JS, nothing like it. This stuff comes from a book by Russell popularizes Fisher's work. This is the famous paper that launches analysis of variance. Interesting because it's under Fisher's name, it's not under Mead's an agriculturalist. In the report from 1934, published in 25, statistical control of the field. What goes on in trials is subject to close scrutiny of the statistical department, so the statistical department is a big deal. Statistical Methods comes out in 1925. 1920, this is a wonderful journal, the Journal of Ministerial Agriculture, has this efficient paper after ads for Coocher's stock rod and other things. It's a journal for farmers. Okay, Fisher wasn't working alone, he had assistants. Altogether he had 5 assistants, 4 who published things. These people had to be taught, and let's talk about it. Well, let's talk about 2 people. Talk about Wishart. Wishart was an assistant. Wishart really carried Fisher's work to Cambridge. He got a lectureship at Cambridge, replacing York, and taught who's who in British mathematical statistics in the 1930s. And he was instrumental in forming the Industrial and Agricultural Research section. And this opening talk on stats and agricultural research is just a homage to Fisher. Okay, so the last assistant was Yates. And Yates, when Fisher left, there wasn't very much of a department. Fisher stayed around living in Harpenden and came in on Saturday mornings, until 1943, so for 10 years his presence at Rothamsted. So that was after Fisher. This was in the age of Alison McFarlane and G.J.S. Ross. So this is the big thing about this is not actually their names, it's the length of the list. This was a ginormous statistics department by the mid-60s, the biggest in Britain. So apologies for you, it's the length of the list. Don't bother about the quality, just look at the length. Okay, Fisher, some more Fisher stuff. Fisher left Rothamsted. Russell said a lot of nice things about him. He left Rothamsted for 2 places. He actually got Fisher's chair, sorry, actually got Pearson's chair. Department looks like being a hell of a job to pull together, but when we tried, it was a hell of a job to pull together, and he didn't, because the Fisher and the Pearson were fragmented. When he went to Cambridge to the genetics chair in 1943, he says it's been let down to be almost non-existent. The department was about the size of Rothamsted's department after Fisher had left, so they almost nobody there. So how did Fisher help? This afterwards, okay. Well, he created an elevated position of agricultural statistician. time was right because the agriculturalists were ready for it. So almond tree had broken through 20 years before, medical science 10 years before. Fisher played the part brilliantly. Russell took a chance and gave him a job and produced very nicely public relations. So how else did it help him? Well, it led to other things. One reason why it led to other things is that nobody Rothamsted was doing those things, so they were toast to tread on. So they used to do genetics, and at Cambridge, agriculturalists did genetics, and Rothamsted, they did Fisher's age. And of course, the achievement of Fisher reflect well on Rothamsted. That's the end. So,
Thank you very much, Alison. First met Alison when she came to work at Rothamsted, and she was given the job to work on lambs and shearlings, but then went on to a more distinguished career in medical science.
Multi-centre longitudinal study of analyse trials.
Well, to start with the picture of Frank Yates. He loved this Fisher's calculator. He liked to photograph using it. We still demonstrate it from time to time, trying to keep it working. And so that's Fisher's Millionaire, which was, of course, more than his salary, but it was considered to be very extravagant. The student said he only used a slide rule, but Fisher required a 10-digit calculator, and that's what he used. We have a sort of honours board on the staff list on this. I've just put up the early staff to show some of the famous names that started their careers at Rothamsted. Later on they left and they decided they ought to write more readable books than Fisher's methods, and so several of those brought Fisher's ideas into different disciplines, academic, medical, and environmental, and industrial. I'll talk about one or two of those in a moment, but so Frank Yates, what did he do? Well, first of all, he was appointed as surveyor in West Africa, in Gold Coast, now Ghana, and there he learnt all about least squares methods. But when Fisher succeeded Carl Pearson at University College, Yates became head of statistics, and Fisher lived locally, and they continued to collaborate very regularly. And for instance, they worked on the enumeration of the 6x6 Latin squares, which Fisher was required to, if you want to get a proper random Latin square 6x6, you have to use Fisher's tables, which are very complicated. But that was a great piece of work. But Yates particularly was interested in balanced incomplete blocks, which he'd learned from his school prize of mathematical recreations by Rice Hall, which is full of interesting stuff. Not at all recreational, but the idea that what you read in your early years becomes useful when you need it. So balanced incomplete blocks really go back to 18th century studies of the 15 schoolgirls' problems, how 3 girls can go for a week with 2 different companions every day for their afternoon walk. And this was a 15 block thing with blocks of 3. And Fisher there, Yates also developed the theory of confounding, but by 1938 he decided that everything really of importance in experimental design had been done, and so he then concentrated on sampling theory and censuses and surveys, which he published his famous book after the war. He also spent half a day on a little problem of contingency tables, and was very annoyed that nobody had heard of anything about Yeats apart from Yeats's correction. Which he says, he did give a talk about it about 60 years later, just before he, in his late ages, he decided he'd give a talk about the history of Yeats's correction. Now, from those early collaborators, young staff, most of them became distinguished later on. Wishart has already been mentioned, the Wishart matrix. Cochrane developed with Cochrane and Cox with experimental designs, and also worked with George Snedeker. George Snedeker was very important because he was the one who popularized Fisher's methods in the United States and persuaded agriculture institutes to use Fisher's designs. David Finney came at the beginning of the war and learned all about bioassay, and also did surveys of, and Kempthorne also came about the same time and developed more theories of experimental design. Maurice Crenay was here for a short time and also wrote his book about design of experiments after the war, before he went to Southampton. And then after the war we had Anscombe, who then ended up at Cambridge. So all these people learnt their statistics from the history of Fisher and Yeats. And during the war, Yeats became an honorary wing commander and advised the RAF on various topics such as how to improve their precision of their bombing, and also he worked with Ernest Jones to decide whether the V1 bombs on London were random or targeted. And he decided they fitted a beautifully Poisson distribution, and they were therefore random, and therefore the Germans had not yet got a targeting method. They only a vague idea that it would end somewhere in London. Then he, after the war, he decided to set up a statistical research service for agricultural institutes in the UK and abroad, particularly for the Colonial Office, and a lot of work was done in different developing countries. And then he went to India and worked with Mahalanobis for the World Fertility Survey, and developed collaboration with Indian statisticians like C.R. Rao. But there was so much work required to analyse all the experiments that he'd undertaken to do. They're all done by hand, mainly by women and using desk calculators. But by 1953, he heard about the availability of a computer which was no longer being used, and it was called the Elliott 401, and it was in a warehouse in Cambridge, and they organised that they could be leased to have it at Rothamsted. And so we started with this, the first computer used for civil science, with 5 immediate access registers and nearly 3,000 words of store, and a typewriter input. And later on, we developed the added paper tape and to print the results, and harnessed a very primitive card reader which could read up to 15 cards a minute. A great big clanking. So some of our jobs took hours and hours. One job for the Scottish pig breeding people took 400 hours. We used to run it all night, day after day, and you would start an analysis and go down to the pub and then come back to see whether it had done the first iteration. And if so, you could press a button to do the next iteration. So that was how we did it. The program, the 401 had a very primitive machine code. All it could do was add, subtract, one or two logicals, multiply but not divide, and a few tests for 0 and for negative numbers. And from that, we had to develop all the routines for basic operations, logs, square roots, normal probability, and of course how to sort lists, how to handle multivariate tables, and separate programs were for each analysis, for experimental design, regression surveys, multivariate and cluster analysis, bioassay, and functional optimization. And it handled all kinds of jobs for the users, paper tape, punch cards, and the results had to be labelled by hand. Some of the early programmers were Michael Healy and John Carr and Howard Simpson, who worked on surveys. Mike Westmacott, who was there for a short time, was more famous for being given 6 months' leave to climb Everest. He was very important in the success of the Everest expedition. That's why he's better known. And then we had Brian Leach working on animal experiments, and I worked on maximum likelihood. And then in 1968, John Nelder was appointed when Yates officially retired. Yates didn't actually retire, he stayed around for the next 25 years, as people tend to do at Rothamsted. He'd been at Wellesbourne and collaborated with Roger Mead, father of our next speaker, and they worked on the simplex algorithm. They came to Rothamsted to test it, and then he succeeded Yates as head of statistics. And his first idea then was to develop general algorithms for statistical analysis, and he'd met Graham Wilkinson from Adelaide, who'd got a primitive package called GenStat, which just about worked out how to decompose a designed experiment and work out the analysis of variance. But Yates, Nelder required it to be more generalized, to deal with all kinds of important statistical analyses, multivariate analysis and regression, and so on. And then he appointed Robert Wedderburn, who was a brilliant young man who saw that probability analysis could be extended to fit models with error distributions of the exponential family. This gave rise to the theory of generalized linear models, and Nelder proposed a new package called GLIM, which was adopted by the Royal Statistical Society Computing Section, and GLIM was very widely used in medical and other applications. Robert Wedderburn sadly died tragically because he had some allergies and died on a walking holiday where he thought he was stung by a bee and had a very bad reaction and died. It's one of the great tragedies of statistics. And John Garr succeeded Nelder in 1984. And John Garr was very active right up to just before his death in May this year, and he complained that he wasn't going to be fit enough to complete 2 important papers. But that's the way people are these days. Very sad. And other statisticians in the Nelder days were Roger Payne, who developed programs for identification keys. I developed maximum likelihood optimization packages and lots of facilities for cluster analysis, which we used on all kinds of applications. Rob Kempton, who's worked for me and then developed ecological models, and then later on became the head of statistics at Edinburgh BIOS, but he sadly died before the end of his time. Donald Priest, who developed some ideas of experimental design theory and created some interest by taking a pack of cards and creating a generalized Eugen rectangle, which was displayed in the entrance to our department. And Rosemary Bailey is still very active, and she developed many ideas in orthogonality. And then the Rothamsted statisticians were quite active in promoting statistics. Fisher became the first president of the Biometric Society, and later on the first president of the Royal Statistical Society. And Yates was very influential in forming the British Computer Society, became its first president. And Nelda got involved very early on with the CompStat conferences, which worked on statistical software every 2 years around Europe. And then Gar promoted the British Classification Society, and which later on became one member of the International Federation of Classification Societies, which had interesting conferences worldwide. And then we had Vic Barnett, who promoted the Spruce conferences on statistics and the environment. And so later years, Gar becomes head of department in 1984, and succeeded by Vic Barnett, who hoped to find that the statistics department would become a fundraising statistical service, but the admin weren't particularly interested. So he retired and then succeeded by Robin Thompson, head of department, who developed Remel models with 2 components of error. And then GenStat developed was separated from Rothamsted and became a commercial company, VSN, under Roger Payne, that is still flourishing. And finally, in 2012, Andrew Mead became head of statistics, and he will talk about that in a little bit of time. And that's the fate of our statistics department, which is being knocked down together with the old computer buildings, lost to posterity, replaced by a new hall of residence called the Fisher Hall, which is one reminder. And finally, a bit of graphics which I was playing around with, which I was warned when I first came to Rothamsted about what was called the not invented here syndrome, which means that you must never talk about systematic experiments, you must never talk about Bayesian methods, you must never talk about non-parametric methods, and these were part of the sort of ethos which we had to survive. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, I kind of felt I wanted to be a discussant rather than a speaker, because I don't want to talk about the history of the last 15 years, because it's not very interesting, I don't think. But really want to talk about the future of Rothamsted statistics and where, what the legacy of the last 100 years sort of means for where we are now. As the last 2 speakers were speaking, various things that just reflected as I was listening to them that I hadn't included in what I put together. Yes, the role of an agricultural statistician these days is somewhat more constrained than Fisher was in what he could do. The current research definitely reflects the past, as we'll see in a few minutes. And that our current research is very much linked to the research program of the Institute. You don't do things that are not connected. The idea that the statistics department is king, I also will reflect on in a moment. It still is in some way. The thing that really got me, I'm slightly worried about, because I've been at Rothamsted for just over 5 years, is the decreasing duration of those who are stewards for statistics at Rothamsted. If you go from Fisher to Yates to Gower to Nelder to Gower, I think I've done my time already, so that's a big concern. Okay, so the legacy of Fisher, Yates et al. Rothamsted still has a very strong worldwide reputation for statistics, and that's both, I guess, potentially a lead weight around the necks of those of us who still work there, but also a platform to leap from, I guess. It's very much seen as the key contributor to agricultural environmental statistics. I think hopefully still is. And I know as I was becoming a statistician in agricultural service back in the late 80s and early 90s, Rothamsted was still the leading role across UK agricultural research institutes. My ex-boss used to describe it as the spiritual home of agricultural statistics. The power of statistics department is key, is still just about the case, in that nobody can run a field experiment at Rothamsted without my say-so. Hopefully that's a good thing. So, trying to sort of reflect on the legacy was trying to sort of put it in a sort of a personal perspective of being appointed as the head of statistics at Rothamsted. And I sort of see this as both a challenge and an opportunity. So the challenge was that we had a new director appointed about 2 months after I was appointed, and pretty much the first thing he said to me was, so what's the next new bit of really exciting statistics that's going to come out of Rothamsted? No challenge. Hopefully, he's still on site at the moment, so I think I must be doing the right thing. Rothamsted statistics, as Gavin has sort of suggested, following the departure of the GenStat group to VSNI in 2002, to some extent went into decline. And very much the group that I inherited when I moved there 5 years ago was sort of very much a service role that they were playing. So a big challenge that we are hopefully our meeting, is to rebuild the statistics research capability of the group of Aldrich. And part of that is about integrating statistics into the broader research program, that we're seen as part of the whole research program rather than just an add-on that provides some useful numbers at the end of the bits of research. The opportunity, having a supportive director means that applied statistics is very much appreciated within the Institute, so the history is a good thing from that perspective as part of the Institute. And of course, as has been touched on already, we have access to some rather interesting historical data sets that still provide opportunities for some really interesting research. I'll illustrate that shortly. As somebody pointed out, there's this wonderful board that now sits outside my office, listing the department. So I've taken somewhat more than was shown earlier on to show the first two lists of members of the statistics department. There's another 2.5 lists of similar length things as these. But it's outside my office, so every time I go out of my office along the corridor, I can't forget about the legacy that I have, to some extent, inherited. So, as we said, recent years in Rothamsted, the GenStat team moved out, and following that move, Rothamsted went through various reorganisations, which meant that the statistics department became a statistics group and sat in various other departments, including being managed as part of a non-quantitative science department at one point during the last 15 years, 17 years, I can't count. As I said, there's less of a focus on statistical research, more on statistical support for what's become an increasingly broad science program in the Institute. And I guess that's a consequence of changes in the funding and the management of agricultural science, the model for the Institute. There's also very much been an associated reduction in staff numbers and then hence the capacity of statistics at Rothamsted to do the exciting things that we ought to be trying to do. But I think a good thing that came out of that was a recognition that what we needed within the Institute was a development program for our PhD students and staff within the Institute. What I see is making our scientists more statistically literate, so that the conversations we have with them are somewhat more interesting than explaining what a mean is and a standard deviation is. And of course, the need of the Institute has changed, so that we now have a bioinformatics department group, an eco-informatics group, a statistical genomics group, mathematical modelling groups, and spatial statistics groups. The requirements of the Institute research program are so much broader in terms of quantitative science than the statistical legacy, I guess, that the Institute has. You could see that as competition for resources. I like to see it as collaboration of complementary expertise. Though the challenge is persuading some of our colleagues that they need to talk to both the bioinformatician and the statistician, and that not one of us can actually solve everything. And I guess now, very much what we're trying to do is to rebuild both external connections and establishing more of a collaborative research profile within the Institute. But I think to really think about the future of statistics at Rothamsted, we need to take a slightly broader view. As a view of the UK agri-environmental applied statistics world, if you like. As has already been commented, I think that the big success that you would probably identify in agriculture, agri-environmental statistics in the last 20 or so years is BIOS, previously SAS, that was developed by Bob Kempton, as has already been mentioned. And that was very much a different model integrated into the Scottish agri-environmental research community and becoming bigger than just about agricultural statistics, being very much a range of quantitative disciplines and a range of different application areas. At the same time as that, there was very much a decline in statistics groups in the former AFRC, BBSRC institutes. John Gower wrote a review somewhere in the 1980s, I can't remember the exact date of it, which identified that there were 100 statisticians working in agricultural statistics of some sort or other in 25 research organisations in the mid-1970s. I suspect the figure now is probably just about into double figures across about 3 institutes. So lots has changed. Mergers of institutes, the rise of the computer package that can do everything without needing a statistician. Bioinformatics to solve some of the problems that statisticians maybe forgot to think about. And a lot of competition for medical and pharmaceutical statistics who tend to pay a little bit better than the agricultural sector. And also I think a decline in the training at MSc level of applied biologically oriented statisticians. It's a real challenge to find people who want to work in the kind of environment that Rothamsted now is in terms of statistics. There were similar declines in the NERD funded organisations, the environmental statistics side of things as well. And rather scarily, a lot of many UK agri-environment research organisations in the UK don't have a statistician anymore. Although I guess that's not that unusual compared with a lot of other parts of the world. So what I have identified with various colleagues is the need to establish a strong agri-environmental applied statistics presence across what is now quite fragmented UK research environment. So really a network built on the legacy of Fisher, Yates et al. So working with Mark Brewer, the current director of BIOS, with Pete Henrys at CEH, the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and Ben March into the British Geological Survey. The 4 of us are hoping that we'll get something like this off the ground in the next couple of years. So the next couple of months. It's a little more ambitious than that. Okay. I thought it was useful just to reflect back on some of the things that we currently are doing at Rothamsted and how they kind of link back to what has been being done even maybe 100 years ago. One of the bits of research I did PhD student John Addy finished about a year ago, doing analyses of the LTE data, the long-term experiments data that Rothamsted is famous for. This was part of his study, modelling the impact of exploring the climate variability and effects on end response of other agronomic factors by using 100+ years worth of data to actually explore those different patterns. So we have an ability to model the response in terms of meteorological events at different points in the year. And as has already been identified, this is something that Fisher did in 1921 was his paper with orthogonal polynomials to try and analyse very much the same data. We're involved in another network, an international network, the Global Long-Term Experiments Network, in trying to work with people who have long-term experiments around the world. There are hundreds of these. And we're trying to use these, combining data across these different experiments to address the current real key questions that we have about the sustainability of agricultural production across the world. So this is just one part of the output of a pilot study that we've been looking at to look at three aspects of sustainability: productivity, soil carbon, and nitrogen use efficiency, where we've taken the data from Broadborg and looked at the trade-offs and synergies amongst these different variables to identify that the most sustainable cropping systems are those that have relatively diverse rotations with an intermediate level of nitrogen applied to them, which probably isn't, you know, it isn't rocket science that was there, but it's really good that we can use these data to show that these systems are what we need to work with. And of course, we're designing new long-term experiments. Obviously, Rothamsted has a history for long-term experiments. We have what we're calling our potentially long-term experiment. It's currently 1 year old, but it's a multidisciplinary experiment. And when the group of scientists got together to think about developing this, one of the things they said was, yes, it has to be multidisciplinary, yes, it has to be multi-site, it needs to be radical, it needs to address the current challenges of agricultural science, but it needs to be statistically robust. So we've learned a little bit from Fisher's day about the importance of statistics in designing the experiments correctly to be able to address this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of that now because I don't really have time, but if anybody's interested in this experiment, I'm happy to talk about the approach that we've taken to design it. And a completely different angle of current challenges that we're working on, working with another of my colleagues, Kirsty Hassel, we're working with omics data to look at the analysis of omics responses from complex experiments. Complex is in inverted commas because that's what my bioinformatics colleagues call them. They're two-factor factorials. It seems to be something that the bioinformaticians struggle to cope with. So this is some work where we were trying to link the idea of having complex designs with the fact that we've got very large numbers of response variables that we're interested in analysing. And so taking a mass univariate response analysis approach, where what we're interested in doing is identifying the responses with particular patterns, significant effects, if you like, but incorporating multiplicity corrections. And so the approach that we've taken is to identify these three steps that you need to take within the analysis of ranking the responses by the size of the effect, filtering them against some kind of threshold, and modelling the response obviously against the design structure. And what we've identified is a number of different orders in which you apply those three steps that are appropriate for different kinds of questions that you might want to address, depending on the aims of the experiment, the design structure, and so on. Okay, so just a reflection on a few bits of the research that we have currently been involved with. What is the future of Rothamsted statistics? Well, hopefully now I think it's a very much an integrated component of the Institute research programme, which I guess is the same as it was in Fisher's day, and through some of the history of Rothamsted. We are now funded to contribute to all of our Institute strategic programmes and three national capabilities that include the long-term experiments. So we have funding to get involved in across the breadth of the research of the Institute. And we're increasingly involved, as statisticians should be, in the development, the co-development of research proposals across the breadth of the Institute of Science. Of course, there are challenges, as there are with statistics, I guess, in every field that we work in. The challenge of increasing quantities, increasing complexity of the data that we work with. And that might be satellite images, as has been talked about in other talks I've been in so far today, drones, sensors, and so on. Our director thinks that these are big data, and I keep trying to persuade him that they're not really big data yet. If we collect enough of them, they might be. Proteomics I think, is an increasingly complex area that statisticians need to be involved with, and it's an opportunity for us. And the collection of data from farm and machinery is increasingly one of the big data generation exercises in agriculture. All of the equipment manufacturers have computers built into the cabs of their harvesters, tractors, whatever, that collect data every second or whatever, just like all these other big data sources. And none of them know what to do with those data. So that's a challenge that I hope we'll have an opportunity to work with. And of course, there's the development, as we've heard already at the conference, the development of accessibility of new analysis tools. I was intrigued when I was starting to think about coming to the conference and was seeing the strapline of thinking about statistics and data science. I'm not always convinced that the two things quite work together or are coming together as they should be. But I think it's as statisticians working in an applied field, what's really important is that we understand the range of these tools that are available to us and are using the right tools for the job. I'm still fighting my boss, my director, who seems to think that AI is the answer to everything. We'll keep working on that. And as I've already said, integration with other areas of expertise. We have this broad range of quantitative skills within Rothamsted now, and it's really important that we work across that. So finally, building on Fisher's legacy, hopefully we will have a larger agri-environmental applied statistics network. The UK is our aim for the moment, but maybe bigger and greater than that, who knows. The idea of that really is to build the critical mass that is now needed, that has been lost with the decline of statistics across the agricultural research institutes, or agri-environmental research institutes. So providing a critical mass that helps us to actually be better at supporting the science that is needed. Sharing resources, expertise, training activities by doing that. And part of that is supporting what is increasingly common, the isolated statistician within organisations, or even the organisations that don't have any statistical expertise. And that's our aim. As I said, I think the application of statistical approaches is still really important for modern agri-environmental research. And most of that is applying and building on the methods that have been developed by and through the influence of Rothamsted over the last 100 years. Of course, we have a broader range of application areas, different scales that we have to work on. We work on data from the landscape to the molecule, I guess, within Rothamsted now. And it's always important, as I said, to embrace the new methodologies, new tools, though not always to apply them unless they're the right thing to be applied. So Rothamsted, I hope, has a bright future. Whether I will be there, given the duration of the stewards of Rothamsted, to see this bright future, I don't know. But it's really about maintaining a strong collaborative research capability that I hope builds on the legacy of the last 100 years of statistics development